Chapter Introduction. Episode 31. Finalizing the list. Thus, were the masculine deities our libertines prepared for their lubricity. We will see in due time and place the use to which they were put. 142 subjects remained. But whereas there had been much trifling over the 8, there was none with this game. Not one of the defeated candidates was dismissed until he had served some purpose. Our libertines spent a month with them at the Duke's chateau. As they were on the eve of setting forth, as all the practical arrangements were completed, the company had little else to do but amuse itself until the day of departure. When at last they were thoroughly fed up with their sport, they fell upon a pleasant means for disposing of what had provided it. That was to sell the boys to a Turkish pirate, a scheme whereby no trace of them would be left and a part of the costs would be recovered. They were sent in small groups to a place near Monaco. The Turk came to get them and lead them off into slavery. Doubtless a dreadful fate, but one whereby, nonetheless, our 4 villains were hugely entertained. And now came the moment of choosing the fuckers. Those of this class who failed to meet the standards were the cause of no embarrassment. Being mature and reasonable men, it was enough to pay them for their trouble, their traveling expenses, and send them home. The 8 experts who had contracted to furnish the fuckers had, furthermore, many fewer obstacles to surmount, since the specifications were by and large concrete, and the conditions made no difference at all. Thus it was 50 came to the rendezvous. From amongst the 20 biggest, the 8 youngest and most attractive were singled out, and since in the sequel, mention will almost never be made save of the 4 biggest of the 8, I shall restrict myself to naming these. Hercule, with a body hewn in the image of the god whose name he had been given, was 26 years of age, and was endowed with a member 8 1/4 inches around, by 13 long. Nothing more beautiful nor more majestic has ever been seen. This tool was almost always upright, and with only 8 discharges, so, tests revealed, it could fill a pint measure to the brim. Hercule was also very gentle, very sweet, and had an interesting countenance. Antinous, so named because, like Hadrian's favorite, he had, together with the world's prettiest prick, its most voluptuous ass, and that exceedingly rare. Antinous wielded a device measuring 8 inches in circumference and 12 in length. He was 30 and had a face worthy of his other features. Bumcleaver lugged a club so amusingly shaped, it was nearly impossible for him to perform an embuggery without splitting the ass. Whence came the name he bore. The head of his prick. Chapter Introduction. Episode 32. The Journey Begins. Resembled the heart of an ox. It was 8 3/8 inches around. Behind it, the shaft measured only 8, but was crooked, and had such a curve it neatly tore the anus when penetrating it. And this quality, very precious to libertines as jaded as ours, had made him singularly sought after. Invictus, so named because no matter what he did, his erection was perpetual, was furnished with an engine 11 inches long and 7 15/16 inches around. Greater ones, who had difficulty stiffening, had been turned away to make room for him who, regardless of the quantity of discharges he produced in a day, rose heavenward at the slightest touch. The other 4 were of about the same dimensions and the same shape. The 42 rejected candidates provided a fortnight's entertainment, and, after the friends had put them through their paces and worn them to the bone, they were well rewarded and bidden adieu. Nothing now remained but the choice of the 4 ladies in waiting, and this final stage was without doubt the most picturesque. The president was not the only one whose tastes were depraved. His three friends, and especially D'Orsay, were indeed a little tainted by his accursed, crapulous, and debauched mania, which causes one to find a greater, more piquant attraction in an old, disgusting, and filthy object than in what nature has fashioned most divinely. Explaining this fancy would probably be difficult, but it exists in many people. Nature's disorder carries with it a kind of sting which operates upon the high-keyed sort with perhaps as much, and even more force, than do her most regular beauties. It has been proven, moreover, that when one's prick is aloft, it is horror, villainy, the appalling, that pleases. Well, where are they more emphatically present than in a vitiated object? If 'tis the filthy thing which pleases in the lubricious act, then certainly the more filthy the thing, the more it should please, and it is surely much filthier in the corrupted than in the intact and perfect object. No, as to that, there's no doubt. Furthermore, beauty belongs to the sphere of the simple, the ordinary, whilst ugliness is something extraordinary, and there is no question but that every ardent imagination prefers in lubricity the extraordinary to the commonplace. Beauty, health, never strike one save in a simple way. Ugliness, degradation, deal a far stouter blow. The commotion they create is much stronger. The resultant agitation must hence be more lively. In the light of all this, there should be no cause for astonishment in the fact that an immense crowd of people prefer to take their pleasure with an aged, ugly, and even stinking crone, and will refuse a fresh and pretty girl. No more reason to be astonished by that, I say, than at a man who for his promenades prefers the mountain's arid and rugged terrain to the monotonous pathways of the Ten. Chapter Introduction, Episode 33, On the Road to the Castle Plains. All these matters depend upon our tastes in this connection, then it is in our power to alter the form of our bodies. Be that as it may, such, as I have said, was the dominating taste of the president, and to tell the truth, the taste which came near to predominating in his three confreres, for when it came to choosing female servants, their views were identical, and we are about to see from this choice that its making bespoke the constitutional disorder and deprivation to which we have just alluded. The most painstaking search was initiated in Paris. The four creatures needed were finally located. However loathsome may be their portraits, the reader will none the less permit me to draw them. That I do so is essential to that aspect of manners, the elucidation of which is one of the principal aims of this work. Marie was the name of the first one. She had been servant of a notorious brigand quite recently put to death on the wheel. Whipping and branding had been her penalty. She was 58 years old, had almost no hair left. Her nose stood askew. Her eyes were dull and rheumy. Her mouth large and filled with her 32 teeth. Yes, they were all there, but all were yellow as sulfur. She was tall, raw-boned, having whelped 14 children, all 14 of whom, said she'd strangled from fear they'd turn out ne'er-do-wells. Her belly rippled like the waves of the sea, and one of her buttocks was devoured by an abscess. The second was known as Louison. She was 60, stunted, hunchbacked, blind in one eye, and lame. But she had a fine ass for her age, and her skin was still in fairly good repair. She was as wicked as the devil, and forever ready to commit any horror and every extravagance one could possibly demand of her. Erez was 62. She was tall, thin, looked like a skeleton. Not a hair was left on her head, not a tooth in her mouth, and from this opening in her body she exhaled an odor capable of flooring any bystander. Her ass was peppered with wounds, and her buttocks were so prodigiously slack, one could have furled the skin around a walking stick. The hole in this splendid ass resembled the crater of a volcano, what for width, and for aroma the pit of a privy. In all her life, Thérèse declared, she had never once wiped her ass, whence we have proof positive that the shit of her infancy yet clung there. As for her vagina, it was the receptacle of everything ungodly, of every horror, a veritable sepulchre whose fetidity was enough to make you faint away. She had one twisted arm and limped in one leg. The fourth was called Fanchon. 6 times she had been hanged in effigy, and not a crime exists in. Chapter Introduction. Episode 34. Arrival at the fortress gates. This world she had not committed. She was 69. She was flat-nosed, short, and heavy. She squinted, had almost no forehead, had nothing but 2 old teeth in her stinking maw, and they were ready to fall out. An erysipelas blazed all over her ass, and hemorrhoids the size of your fist hung from her anus. A frightful chancret consumed her vagina, and one of her thighs had been entirely burned. She was dead drunk 3/4 of the year, and in that condition, her stomach being very weak, she vomited over everything. Despite the batchful hemorrhoids adorning it, her asshole was naturally so large that all unawares she blew driblets and farts, and often more besides. Apart from acting as servants in the luxurious recreation palace the 4 friends had in mind, these women were also to lend a hand at all the convocations and render all the lubricious services and ministrations that might be required of them. As soon as all these matters had been decided, and the summer having already begun, they turned their thoughts to the transporting of the various objects which were, during the 4 months' sojourn on Durset's estate, to render its inhabitation comfortable and agreeable. A vast store of furniture and mirrors, of viands and wines and liqueurs of all kinds were ordered borne thither. Workmen were sent there, and little by little the numerous subjects were conducted to the chateau, where Durset, who had gone ahead, received, lodged, and established them as they arrived. But the moment has come to give the reader a description of the renowned temple appointed for so many luxurious sacrifices throughout the projected 4-month season. He will observe with what great care they had chosen a remote and isolated retreat, as if silence, distance, and stillness were libertinage's potent vehicles, and as if everything which through these qualities instills a religious terror in the senses had necessarily and evidently to bestow additional charm upon lust. We are going to picture this retreat not as once it was, but in the state of embellishment and yet more perfect solitude that resulted from our 4 friends' efforts. To reach the place one had first to get to Basel. At that city you crossed the Rhine, beyond which the road became steadily narrower until you had to abandon your carriage. Soon afterward you entered the Black Forest. You plunged about 15 leagues into it, ascended a difficult, tortuous road that, without a guide, would be absolutely impracticable. By and by you caught sight of a sinister and mean hamlet of charcoal burners and gamekeepers. There began the territory Durset owned, and the hamlet was his. As this little village's population was composed almost entirely of thieves or smugglers, Durset easily befriended it, and his first order to the inhabitants was expressly to enjoin them, under no circumstances, to allow anyone whomsoever to pass on toward the chateau after the 1st of November, the date by which the entire society was to be assembled in it. He distributed weapons to his faithful vassals, granted them certain privileges they had been. Chapter Introduction. Episode 35. Entering the Grand Hall. Long soliciting, and the barrier was lowered. That done and the gates tightly sealed, one will see by the following description how difficult of access was Silling, the name Durset's chateau bore. Having passed the village, you begin to scale a mountain almost as high as the St. Bernard, and infinitely more difficult to ascend. For the only way to reach the summit is by foot. Not that the route is forbidden to pack mules, but such are the precipices which everywhere border the one so very narrow path that must be followed, that you run the greatest danger if you ride. 6 of the mules used to transport supplies and food perished, taking with them 2 laborers who had though to mount astride them. 5 full hours are required to reach the top of the mountain, And there you come upon another extraordinary feature which, owing to the precautions that had been taken, became a new barrier so insurmountable that none but birds might have overcome it. The topographical accident we refer to is a crevice above 60 yards wide which splits the crest into northern and southern parts, with the result that, after having climbed up the mountain, it is impossible, without great skill, to go back down it. Dursey had united these two parts, between which a precipice fell to the depth of 1,000 feet and more, by a fine wooden bridge, which was destroyed immediately the last of the crew had arrived, and from this moment on, all possibility of communicating with the chateau of Silling ceased. For cross the bridge, and you come down into a little plain about 4 acres in area. The plain is surrounded on all sides by sheer crags rising to the clouds, crags which envelop the plain within a faultless screen. The passage known as the bridge path is hence the only one by which you may descend into or communicate with the little plain. The bridge removed or destroyed, there is not on this earth a single being, of no matter what species you may imagine, capable of gaining this small plot of level land, and it is in the center of this flat space, so well surrounded, so solidly protected, that one finds Dursey's chateau. Yet another wall, 30 feet high, girds it. Beyond the wall, a moat, filled with water and exceedingly deep, defends a last tall and winding enclosure. A low and straight postern finally leads into the great inner court, around which all the living quarters are built. And they are very capacious, very well furnished, thanks to the arrangements latterly concluded. One discovers a long gallery on the first floor. I would have it remarked that the description I am about to give of the apartments corresponds not to what in former times they may have been, but to the manner in which they had just been rearranged and distributed in accordance with our libertines' common conception. From the gallery you moved into a very attractive dining hall, provided with buffets shaped like towers, which, communicating with the kitchen, made it possible to serve the company its food hot, promptly, and without the help of any waiters. From this dining hall, hung in tapestries, warmed by heating devices, furnished with ottomans, with excellent armchairs, and with everything which could make it both comfortable and pleasing to the eye, you passed into a large living room or salon, simple, plain, but exceedingly warm and equipped with the very best. Chapter Introduction. Episode 36. Inspecting the castle's interior furniture. Adjacent to this room was an assembly chamber intended for the storyteller's narrations. This was, so to speak, the lists for the projected jousts, the seat of the lubricious conclaves, and as it had been decorated accordingly, it merits something by way of a special description. Its shape was semicircular. Set into the curving wall were 4 niches whose surfaces were faced with large mirrors, and each was provided with an excellent ottoman. These 4 recesses were so constructed that each faced the center of the circle. The diameter was formed by a throne, raised 4 feet above the floor and with its back to the flat wall, and it was intended for the storyteller. In this position, she was not only well before the 4 niches intended for her auditors, but the circle being small, was close enough to them to ensure their hearing every word she said, for she was placed like an actor in a theater, and the audience in their niches found themselves situated as if observing a spectacle in an amphitheater. Steps led down from the throne. Upon them were to sit the objects of debauchery, brought in to soothe any sensory irritation provoked by the recitals. These several tiers, like the throne, were upholstered in black velvet, edged with gold fringe, and the niches were furnished with similar and likewise enriched material, but in color dark blue. At the back of each niche was a little door, leading into an adjoining closet, which was to be used at times when, having summoned the desired subject from the steps, one preferred not to execute before everyone the delight for whose execution one had summoned that subject. These closets were provided with couches and with all the other furnishing required for every kind of impurity. On either side of the central throne, an isolated column rose to the ceiling. These two columns were designed to support the subject in whom some misconduct might merit correction. All the instruments necessary to meting it out hung from hooks attached to the columns, and this imposing sight served to maintain the subordination so indispensable to parties of this nature, a subordination whence is born almost all the charm of the voluptuousness in persecutors' souls. One could walk from this semicircular room directly to a chamber which formed the end of this part of the living quarters. This chamber was a kind of boudoir. It was soundproof and secluded, but very warm within, very dark during the day, and its purpose was for private interviews and secluded contests, or for certain other secret delights which will be unveiled in the sequel. To reach the other wing, one had to retrace one's footsteps, and once in the gallery, at the end of which an exceedingly handsome chapel was visible, one entered the opposite wing, which completed the circuit of the inner courtyard. You discovered a splendid antechamber, adjoined by 4 superb apartments, each having a boudoir and wash cabinets. Splendid Turkish beds, canopied in 3-colored damask, with matching furniture, adorned these suites, whose boudoirs offered everything and more of the most sensual that lubricity might fancy. These 4 units, exceptionally well heated and comfortable, were intended for the 4 colleagues, who were perfectly lodged therein, in that the protocol stipulated that their wives were to occupy the same. Chapter Introduction, Episode 37, Designing the Schedule, Quarters. No separate space was set aside for them. Upstairs, the second story contained about the same number of apartments, but they were otherwise divided. You first came upon, to one side, a vast room bordered by 8 niches, each having a little bed. These were the girls' quarters, and beside them were 2 small chambers for the old women who were to have charge of them. Further along, a pair of pretty rooms had been set aside for 2 of the storytellers. Now, turning about and going in the other direction, you found a similar 8-niched room for the little boys. By it were 2 rooms for the duennas appointed to supervise them. And beyond these were 2 more rooms, also alike, for the 2 storytellers. 8 cheerful rooms, as fine as anything you have yet seen, formed the 8 fuckers' quarter, although these individuals were destined to do very little sleeping in their own beds. Below, on the ground floor, were the kitchens, and near them 6 small chambers for the 6 persons to whom the preparation of food had been confided. Amongst them were 3 cooks renowned for their art. They were all females, women having been preferred for a pleasure outing like this one, and I believe the decision was just. The cooks were assisted by 3 robust young scullery maids. But none of the kitchen staff was to appear at the revels. That was not its purpose. And if the rules imposed in this connection were violated, 'tis merely because libertinage stops at nothing, and the true way of extending and multiplying one's desires is to attempt to impose checks upon them. One of these 3 underlings was to look after the numerous livestock which had been fetched to the chateau, with the exception of the 4 aged ladies who were meant for household duties. There were no domestics save for these 3 cooks and their seconds. But depravity, cruelty, disgust, infamy, all those passions anticipated or experienced, had erected another locality whereof it is a matter of urgency that we give the sketch, for the laws essential to the proper unfolding of our tale demand that we depict it with thoroughness now. A fatal stone there was which, cunningly made, could be raised from below the step of the altar in the little Christian temple we discerned from the gallery. Beneath that stone, one beheld a spiral stairway, very narrow and very steep, whose 300 steps could convey you down into the bowels of the earth, to a kind of vaulted dungeon, closed by triple doors of iron, and in which was displayed everything the cruelest art and the most refined barbarity could invent of the most atrocious, as much for gripping one with terror as for proceeding to horrors. And there below, what tranquility, to what degree might not the villain be reassured who brought his victim there? What had he to fear? He was out of France, in a safe province, in the depths of an uninhabitable forest, within this forest in a redoubt which, owing to the measures he had taken, only the birds of the air could approach, and he was in the depth of the earth's entrails. Woe, 100 times woe to the unlucky creature who in the midst of such abandonment were to find himself at the mercy of a villain, lawless and without religion, whom crime amused, and whose only interest lay in his.
Chapter Introduction. Episode 38. Daily routines explained. Passions who heeded naught, had nothing to obey but the imperious decrees of his perfidious lusts. I know not what will transpire in that nether place, but this I may say without doing our tale a disservice, that when a description of the dungeon was given the Duke, he reacted by discharging 3 times in succession. Everything being ready at last, everything perfectly disposed, the subjects installed, the Duke, the Bishop, Curval, and their wives, with the 4 second-ranking fuckers in their train, set off, D'Orsay and his wife, together with all the rest, having arrived beforehand, as we have previously noted, and not without infinite difficulty, finally reached the chateau on the evening of the 29th of October. Immediately they crossed it. D'Orsay had the bridge cut. But that was not all. Having inspected the place, the Duke decided that, since all the provisions were within the fortress, and since therefore they had no need to leave it, it were necessary, in order to forestall external attack, which was little dreaded, and escapes from within, the possibilities of which were less unlikely, it were necessary, I say, to have walled shut all the gates, all the passages whereby the chateau might be penetrated, and absolutely to enclose themselves inside their retreat, as within a besieged citadel, without leaving the least entrance to an enemy, the least egress to a deserter. The recommendation was put into effect. They barricaded themselves to such an extent there was no longer any trace left of where the exits had been. And then they settled down comfortably inside. After the provisions we have just cited had been taken, the 2 days still remaining before the 1st of November were devoted to resting the subjects, that they might make a fresh appearance at the scenes of debauchery soon to begin. And during this interval, the 4 friends labored over a code of laws, which as soon as it was brought to perfection and signed, was promulgated to those concerned. Before advancing to the matter, it is essential that these articles of government be made known to the reader, who, after the exact description we have given him of everything, will now have no more to do than follow the story, lightly and voluptuously, his mind impeded by nothing, his memory embarrassed by no unexpected intrusions. Statutes. The company shall rise every day at 10 o'clock in the morning, at which time the 4 fuckers, who have not been in duty during the night, shall come to pay the friends a visit, and shall each bring a little boy. They shall pass from one bedchamber to another, successively. They shall perform as bidden by the friends' likings and desires. But during the preliminaries, the little boys shall serve only as a tempting prospect, for it has been decided and planned that the 8 maidenheads of the little girls' cunts shall remain intact until the month of December, and their Chapter Introduction. Episode 39. The storytellers are summoned. Asses shall likewise remain in bond, as shall the asses of the 8 little boys, until the month of January, at which times the respective seals shall be broken, and this in order to allow voluptuousness to become irritated by the augmentation of a desire incessantly inflamed and never satisfied, a state
which must necessarily lead to that certain lascivious fury the friends shall strive to provoke, considering it one of lubricity's most highly delectable situations. At 11 o'clock, the friends shall repair to the quarters appointed for the little girls. In that place will be served breakfast, consisting of chocolate, or of roasts cooked in Spanish wine, or of other appropriate restoratives. This breakfast shall be served by the 8 little girls, naked, aided by the 2 elders, Marie and Louison, assigned to the seraglio of girls, the other 2 elders being assigned to that of the boys. If, during this breakfast, the friends are moved to commit impudicities with the little girls, before or after, the latter shall lend themselves thereunto with the resignation prescribed to them, and wherein they shall not be found wanting, without severe punishment being the consequence. But it is agreed that at this hour there shall be undertaken no secret or private exercises, and that if a moment's wantonizing be desired, it shall be conducted openly and before the public present at the morning meal. These little girls shall adopt the general custom of kneeling at all times whenever they see or meet a friend, and they shall remain thus until told to stand. They, the wives and the elders, shall alone be subject to these regulations, wherefrom the others are dispensed, but everyone shall be bound never to address the friends, save as my lord. Before leaving the girls' apartments, that one of the friends who is invested with the month's stewardship, it being intended that for the space of a month one friend shall be in general supervision of everything, each friend acceding to the office in his turn, and in the following order: Durset, during November; the bishop, during December; the president, during January; the duke, during February. He, then, who is the month's presiding officer, before leaving the girls' quarters, shall inspect them all, to determine whether they are in the state wherein they have been instructed to maintain themselves, whereof the elders shall be each morning apprised, and which will be determined by the need that exists for them to keep in such and such a state, as it is strictly forbidden to relieve oneself anywhere, save in the chapel, which has been outfitted and intended for this purpose, and forbidden to go there without individual and special permission, the which shall be often refused, and for good reason. The month's presiding officer shall scrupulously examine, immediately after breakfast, all the girls' water closets, and in the case of a contravention discovered in the one above designated place or in the other, the delinquent shall be condemned to suffer the penalty of death.
Chapter Introduction, Episode 40, Preparing the Storytellers. The friends shall move from there into the little boys' apartments in order to perform the same inspections and similarly to pronounce capital punishment against offenders. The 4 little boys who have not been that morning with the friends shall now receive them when they enter their chamber, and shall untrouser themselves before them. The other 4 shall remain standing in attention, awaiting the orders which are given them. Messieurs may or may not indulge in lewd byplay with the 4 they have not until now seen during the day, but whatever they do shall be done publicly. No intimate commerce shall be held at this hour. At 1 o'clock, those of the girls or the boys, of mature and of young years, who have obtained permission to satisfy urgent needs, that is to say, the heavier sort, and this permission shall never be put most sparingly accorded, and at the most to 1/3 of the subjects, those, we repeat, shall betake themselves to the chapel, where everything has been artistically arranged for the voluptuous delights falling under this head. In this place they will find the 4 friends, who shall wait for them until 2 o'clock, and never any longer, and who shall distribute and adjust them, as they judge proper, to the delights of this order, which they may be moved to taste. From 2 to 3, the first 2 tables shall be served. They shall dine simultaneously, one in the girls' large apartment, the other in that of the young boys. The 3 kitchen servants shall serve these 2 tables. At the first shall sit the 8 little girls and the 4 elders. At the second, the 4 wives, the 8 little boys, and the 4 storytellers. During their meal, Messieurs will be pleased to gather in the living room, where they will chat together until 3 o'clock. Just before this hour, the 8 fuckers shall make their appearance here, as well clothed and as well adorned as it is in their power to be. At 3 shall be served the master's dinner, and the honor to be present there shall be enjoyed by none but the 8 fuckers. This meal shall be served by the 4 wives, entirely naked, aided by the 4 elders, clad as sorceresses. To the latter shall fall the task of bringing the plates from the towers, into which the servants, on the other side, shall have put them, and the plates shall be handed to wives, who shall deposit them on the table. The 8 fuckers, in the course of the dinner, will be at liberty to handle and touch the unclothed bodies of the wives in whatever manner and to whatever extent they please, without the said wives being permitted to refuse or defend themselves. The fuckers will even be able to go to the point of employing insults and of thickening their sticks by apostrophizing them with all the invectives they may see fit to pronounce. The friends shall rise from the table at 5, at which time these messieurs only, the fucker shall retire until the hour of general assembly. These messieurs only, I say, shall pass into the salon, where 2 little boys and 2 little girls, who shall be changed daily, shall, in a state of nudity,